You're listening to iCommunicate on Full Service Radio 830 WCRN. Once again, here's your host, Mark Altman.
So, welcome back, everybody, to the Mindset Go radio show. Again, if you'd like to call in, it's 508-871-7000. We're really not mean. If you call in and you want to contribute and ask a question, Ted and I will make it a really fun, positive experience for you. So we're really encouraging you to come in.
That's our slogan here. Make it fun.
Make it fun. You know it. So welcome back. And so I said as we went into break, we talk a little bit about expectations a little bit. And what the word expectations is tricky on a number of fronts. But what I wanted to focus on in expectations is setting precedents. And one of the dangers of an expectation is when you do something for someone, regardless of whether it came from a template or not, that person starts to expect you to continue to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And then if you don't model that behavior, if you aren't consistent with behavior, you all of a sudden become a bad guy, a failure, a disappointment. Tricky, right?
Failure.
You
failed to follow through.
So I think when it comes to setting precedents, and I'll give you an example, Ted. You ever heard of, in the workplace, you've ever heard of this thing called a 360 review?
No, fill me in.
A 360 review is something many companies, more and more companies are doing, but many are afraid to do. This fits into the topic. It allows the employees to do a review for their boss.
Nice.
Okay? And it's a very, it's not a lengthy process, but it's a very calculated process that's designed to put everybody on an even playing field.
Right.
And what's interesting about the 360 review is when I talk to executives at companies and I say, how come you don't do a 360 review? And their answer in many cases is because if I'm criticized or given feedback of something and I can't actually follow through with it and I can't live up to the expectations of what they're saying, I'm opening a can of worms I don't want to deal with. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's the general message.
Yeah, I can see that point of view.
But Ted, what I don't understand is if I said to you, Ted, you've been so kind to me at the radio station, how can I repay you? Now don't answer. How can I repay you? That question is so open-ended that you could, I've just left myself open to anything. I mean, you could say a trip to Australia.
Oh, but buddy, I was born in the Bronx. You're not even close to leaving yourself open. You're right. You're absolutely right.
So here's the thing about expectations. There's an assumption at times that when you make an overture or an ask or request of someone else and you leave it open-ended and you let them critically think, that means you're obligated to deliver on what they expect. And you're not. An expectation is only allowed if you agree on it, if it's stated and agreed upon. So that's why when I look at the situation of the 360 review, I say, okay, so let's play this out. You do the 360 review, and let's say the person says to you, you don't give me enough feedback. What I would like you to do moving forward is I'd like you to give me feedback 3 times a week. And you're like, holy smoke, I manage 50 people. There's no way in hell I could give you feedback 3 times a week.
That's two jobs right there.
Right? So now, why does the takeaway have to be, well, geez, if they ask me that and I don't think I can meet that expectation or deliver on it, I better not ask at all. And so...
Well, it's fear again.
It's fear. So I bring up expectations because they're such a trigger and they're so polarizing for people. But there's the stigma around expectations. A lot of it can be removed with just obvious communication and conversation strategy.
That's it.
Right?
You know, a lot of these problems in communications and inside cultures, whether they're large enterprise or small mom and pop operations, it's about communicating, setting standards, and defining terms. So nobody's ever confused.
And so, because I like to give our listeners conversation templates. So for our leaders and managers listening out there, play it out. You say, the 360 review, your subject says, I'd like feedback 3 times a week. You respond and say, oh, I totally understand. I get it. I think it's really important to give feedback. probably not going to be able to give you feedback 3 times a week. However, how did you come up with that number? Why 3 times a week as opposed to 2 or 4 or 5 or 1? And then most cases, it was probably somewhat arbitrary.
Right.
And it wasn't even the 3. It was more just consistent feedback. So then you say, how'd you come up with the number? The person 9 times says, I don't really know. I mean, I just would like to get more regular feedback. And you say, well, here's what I can commit to. And it's as simple as that, as opposed to not saying anything at all, being scared, fearful, and not having the conversation. And here's the thing, Ted, the reason why I brought up expectations in relation to templates is because the key to conversation intelligence is if you have had experiences. What's a template? A template is an experience that you've had at some point in your life with other people.
Worthy of repeating.
Worthy of repeating. So if you have had an experience where the last time you did a 360 review, it blew up in your face, and oh my God, well, I better not do that again.
Right.
It was clearly the process. It was clearly the idea.
Couldn't have been me.
Couldn't have been me. Couldn't have been, and by the way, it could have been the person you were dealing with that was just unreasonable or irrational.
Right. Well, what you're saying, again, comes back to selling anything. Whether you're selling yourself, a product, a methodology, a system, you have to get buy-in by doing one thing first, and that is setting expectations. Then you can define the terms and say, well, what is feedback? Well, feedback for some people is being criticized and having their finger waved in their face.
Well said.
Other people hear the word feedback and they're thinking, oh, he's going to praise the great work I did.
Well, Ted, go ahead. Finish your thought.
So, you really have to define terms, and then first expectations, define terms, and then have mutual standards that everybody operates on.
Well, and let me ask you, though, Ted, I agree with 90% of what you said, but when I think of mutual standards, but they don't have to be the same standards for everybody, right? They just have to be mutually agreed upon standards.
Well, if you are a senior vice president, and part of your standard is you can be approached about shortfalls in materials and petty cash, then you have a totally different set of standards than the rest of the people in the company, because they're not handling petty cash, and they're not going to be handling those standards of finance.
Well, no, but okay, go ahead, finish your thought.
So his or her standards in the finance department as the assistant vice president is going to be different than the person who works in the mailroom.
Okay, so that's true. You're taking it a different direction. What I mean is when I say, because this is a really important core value to me, is when I say mutual but different, I don't mean that way. I mean that if I'm managing a department with 10 different people, their need for recognition, feedback, coaching could be different. And so I don't care if I have different rules for each person, but as long as each person and I mutually agree upon those rules, because you can't treat everybody the same way.
All right, let me say it a different way, because I'm old. There's this thing that we say in business that stuff flows downhill. And not everybody has to deal with stuff all day, but some people do. So that can affect their standards and how their expectations of being treated are.
Well, but you're going a different direction there. You're talking about reacting and responding to the standards because of what's happening over the course of their day?
Well, the standards are set by the activities that we go through every day. So if you...
Give me an example, because I'm not...
I'll try to stay out of finance or the mailroom. Let's talk about in the marketing department and the sales department.
Okay, so give me an example of a standard.
A standard in the marketing department is that you're going to create an opportunity for the salespeople to exploit. Whereas they're supposed to go out and chase it down.
Okay.
The marketing people stay in the office and think and create the next marketing opportunity. and the salespeople come back and they give them some feedback, reconnaissance, say, well, that worked, this didn't work, nobody saw that ad, or we need to do something differently. So it goes back into marketing, they tweak it up, and they send it back over to the sales department, and they go out and chase it down. So that goes on all day long, day in, day out. And the standards by which they treat each other and have expectations for each other and the terms that they use with each other are different. But they share a mutual plan, and that is profit.
Right, but the standards shouldn't be different. The standards are the same, but they could fluctuate based on mood, energy, communication style. But the standards
Mark,
themselves shouldn't be different.
Mark, stuff flows downhill.
Yeah.
So, as difficult as it is to accept that some people get paid more than other people, some people have more responsibility than other people. Some people are entitled to complain, and others, they just don't want to complain. They don't want to hear about it from anybody. So I understand what you're saying, but unfortunately, the world is not like that.
Well, no, but I don't agree, because when you say that it flows downhill, that I completely agree with. But what doesn't happen, Ted, with templates and expectations are the standards aren't set in the first place.
Exactly.
So I'm saying that if the standards get set in the first place, there's still no guarantee they're going to be upheld and successful.
I agree with you, but unless you have this process,
right,
where the standards are identified and shared,
totally,
and there's an expectation,
100%,
and the terms are set,
yep,
you're never going to get close to where you want to go.
Yep.
And I agree with you. I'm just saying, after 62 years of dealing with this, I don't want to fight it anymore.
Yeah.
I want to do the best I can for people, but at the same time, it's like, come on.
All right. Well, when we come back for our last segment,
sorry.
No, you're good, Ted. We're going to talk about how do you know when the templates you're using with the expectations are good or bad?
Yeah.
How do you know when to adapt and adjust? So this is the Mindset Go Radio Show. I'm your host, Mark Altman. We'll be right back.